Shall we start? I think we should start. What do you think?
Well,
I think we should start. What do you think? I think we should start.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Karimi. I'm a student at the Graduate School of Design, and we're really happy to have everyone here, the moderator, the speakers, and yourself. So on behalf of the Harvard Arab Weekend, the Harvard Arab Alumni Association, and the Graduate School of Design, thank you all for being here and for attending the panel. There will be two panels from GSD. One is Housing the Spring, which is this one, and the next one is Syrian Refugee Crisis, and we'll have you at both. So I'll begin by introducing our moderator, Mr. Hisham Melham. Mr. Melham is the Washington Bureau Chief of Arabiya, the Dubai-based satellite channel. He's also the correspondent for Melham, the leading Lebanese daily. For 4 years, he hosted Across the Ocean, a weekly current affairs program on U.S.-Arab relations for Arabiya. So without further ado, Mr. Melham.
Thank you, Ali. I really appreciate it. Good morning. Again, let me repeat. My name is Hisham Melham, and I'm not an architect, and I'm not an urban developer. I was telling David that I'm a frustrated architect because I love beautiful buildings. I love old bridges, and every time I go to a great Western city or a Muslim city, other people do bar hopping. I do mosque hopping or Gothic churches hopping, and look for beautiful architectural structures. So that's my only connection to cities. Other than my interest in history, I can tell you a lot about the Greek city-state and the Italian city-states and the politics and the culture, but nothing beyond that. So I'm doing this. I was volunteered to do this by my company to do this panel. I usually talk about politics and history and blues music. Other than that, my knowledge doesn't exist. Anyway, let me say a few words about the season of uprisings in the Arab world. I never called them the Arab Spring. I never believed that they were Arab Spring. I never believed that they are revolutions. These are uprisings, and the impetus was a yearning for dignity, a sense of transformation from being treated as subjects by a collection of mostly autocratic governments, yearning to become full citizens. This is really the impetus behind, the impulse behind the uprisings that began in Tunis and spread like wildfire to the east of the Arab world, North Africa, all the way to Morocco, including Egypt and Syria and Yemen and Bahrain. Let's not forget Bahrain too. So the initial impulse or yearning was for karama, for dignity, empowerment, representation, respect, basic respect for basic human and civil rights. But there's also the economic factor. I mean, there is a large number of disenfranchised Arabs. The majority of Arabs today, from North Africa to the Gulf, are people under the age of 30. We have an army of unemployed youth. There is yearning for decent jobs, and there is yearning for decent housing, and that's what brings us to the issue of housing. The Arab states, those who are rich or poor, are trying to deal with the growing demands of their own population for decent jobs, decent housing, and genuine representation. Is it okay now? It's on? All right. We are going through a difficult transition in the Arab world, whether we're talking about Tunisia, where the Arab Spring, Arab Spring, I shouldn't say Arab Spring. When the first uprising began, we have security problems in places like Libya. We have an ongoing tragic civil war in Syria. Iraq may descend towards greater civil strife. Egypt is in a state of tumult. We are going through a difficult, long transition. To my mind, the best description of transition was the one given by Antonio Gramsci. Those of you who studied modern history and modern philosophy would remember that Antonio Gramsci is a Italian philosopher. And Gramsci said essentially, and this is the quote, "The crisis consists precisely in the fact that the old is dying and the new cannot be born yet, and in the interregnum a great variety of morbid symptoms appear." A great variety of morbid symptoms appear. When you look at Libya, when you look at Egypt, when you look at Syria in particular, or even Yemen and others, what you see are these morbid symptoms that are appearing right now in terms of violence, retrenchment, tribalism, secularism, calls for secessions, in fact. It's a tremendous period of tumult in the Arab world, and the Arab states are struggling to deal with it. They are dealing with it with an assortment or an amalgam of repressive, coercive means, as well as ways of placating, and to want to be blunt, bribing some segments of the population. And I may be blunt about this whole issue, but I think the issue of housing is one of those ways of the Arab states are trying to placate the rising demands of their own populations for, at least in part, decent housing. We have a wonderful panel to discuss these issues, and I hope we will raise issues that go strictly behind the technical parts of the housing issue, and to talk about urbanization, to talk about social and economic development. And because to my mind, you cannot talk seriously about any kind of development, including housing, unless you have the right political environment, which require political reconciliation, which require a redistribution of power, if not wealth. So it will be difficult to talk about economic development, social development, housing, as divorced from the political reality. And what we have, as I said earlier, the situation is very much in flux, and we don't have the kind of political stability that is necessary for any kind of serious development. So let me start by introducing our panelists, and I will start with Her Excellency Shahida Bourawi. Ms. Bourawi is the Secretary of State to the Minister of Equipment and Environment. What do you call it in Arabic? وزارة التجهيز. وزارة التجهيز والبيئة. She's in charge of, which is in charge of housing. She has played an active role in the supervision of housing strategy and development of new designs for the housing sector. She has also contributed to the development and implementation of specific programs for social housing, including replacement of 10,000 houses throughout Tunisia and construction of 12,000 social houses. I don't know what social houses is, and I expect her to explain that to me, but that caught my attention. Social houses for low-income populations and the rehabilitation and integration of over 100 neighborhoods across the Republic. Her Excellency has a background in civil engineering from the National School of Engineers of Tunis. Okay, Ms. Bourawi, please, the floor is yours.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين. السادة والسيدات الحضور الكرام، يسعدني ويشرفني أن أتواجد بينكم اليوم مع أحباء وضيوف جمعية هارفورد العرب بولاية بوسطن، التي تبعد آلاف الكيلومترات على تونس، بلدي تونس الحبيبة، وذلك تلبية لدعوتكم الكريمة لأشارككم فعاليات هذا الملتقى، وذلك خدمة لبلدي وتدعيما للثورة التونسية المباركة، واعتبارا إلى أن أزمة السكن هي واحدة من الأسباب التي أشعلت وتشعل فتيل الثورات الاجتماعية ضد الأنظمة السياسية، بما أن مفهوم السكن يرتبط في الثقافة العربية بمفهوم الوطن، ونظرا لانتشار الفساد والخصاصة، باعتبار أن ربع التونسيين يعيشون تحت خط الفقر وتردي الأوضاع المعيشية بسبب كثرة البطالة ووجود الآلاف من الأسر الذين يقطنون بأكواخ أو بمنازل متداعية للسقوط، التي تفتقر إلى أبسط مقومات العيش الكريم، إضافة إلى تزايد المساكن العشوائية وعدم التوازن بين الجهات. توفرت كل الظروف التي أشعلت فتيل أولى ثورات الربيع العربي في تونس كتعبير عميق عن حجم الأزمة الاجتماعية والاقتصادية التي تعددت أسبابها، ومن بينها أزمة السكن. وسعيا إلى تحقيق الحرية والعدالة الاجتماعية وحفظ الكرامة لكافة أبناء تونس، وذلك من خلال تحسين ظروف العيش وتوفير المسكن اللائق لكل مواطن، خاصة الفئات الاجتماعية المحدودة الدخل أو بالأحرى المنعدمة الدخل. بالجهات الداخلية أقرت الحكومة التونسية برامج جديدة منذ شهر جانفي 2012، وتجدر الإشارة إلى أن لتونس بالرغم من صغر رقعتها الجغرافية وعدد سكانها البالغ حوالي 11 مليون نسمة وقلة مواردها الطبيعية كفاءات بشرية كبيرة خولتها من الحصول على المركز 67 عالميا والثاني إفريقيا في تطوير الموارد البشرية، حيث أن بلادنا تضم حوالي 3800 مهندس معماري منتصب لحسابه الخاص، زيادة على المهندسين المعماريين الذين يعملون بالوظيفة العمومية وبالشركات الخاصة، و157 مكتب دراسات متعدد الاختصاصات، و341 مكتب مهندس مستشار، وحوالي 4000 مقاولة بناء، و2559 باعث عقاري. ومن هذا المنبر فإننا نعبر لكم عن رغبتنا في ربط علاقة تعاون في مجال الهندسة المعمارية بين مدرستكم ونظيرتها بتونس قصد تطوير الخبرات والاستفادة من بعضهما البعض. وقد كان للمهندس المعماري دور هام في إنجاز البرامج السكنية الاجتماعية، حيث ساهم عدد هام من المنتصبين بالجهات بمد الإدارة بالمساعدة الفنية من خلال وضع تصاميم تتلائم والخصوصيات المعمارية للجهات ويراعى فيها الجانب البيئي، وكذلك من خلال المساهمة في مراقبة أشغال الإنجاز. وسأعرض عليكم الآن 4 محاور. أهم ملامح السياسة الاستراتيجية في تونس. ثانيا تشخيص الوضع السكني بعد الثورة، ثم البرنامج الخصوصي للسكن الاجتماعي والبرنامج الجديد لتهذيب وتهيئة الأحياء الشعبية. بسطة صغيرة على تونس، يعني هي توجد الجمهورية التونسية في أقصى الشمال الشرقي من القارة الإفريقية، يحيط بها البحر الأبيض المتوسط من الجهتين الشمالية والشرقية، وتمتد سواحلها أكثر من 1300 كيلومتر، تحدها من الغرب الجزائر ومن الجنوب الشرقي ليبيا. ننتقل إلى المحور الأول. ترتكز التجربة التونسية في مجال السكن أساساً على تدخل الدولة بإيجاد آليات تتمثل في إحداث شركات حكومية مختصة وإصدار تشريع وقوانين، أهمها أولاً الوكالة العقارية للسكنة، وهي مؤسسة حكومية يتمثل دورها في تهيئة الأراضي الصالحة للبناء والمقاسم المعدة للسكن الفردي والجماعي، وقد مكنتها الدولة من العديد من الآليات والقوانين كالانتزاع والشفعة وتسهيل الإجراءات الخاصة بتغيير صبغة الأراضي في إطار أمثلة التهيئة العمرانية للمدن والقرى. وتتولى هذه الوكالة تسويق المقاسم المهيئة المعدة للسكن بثمن التكلفة. هذه بعض المشاريع تم إعدادها من تلك الوكالة. الشركة الوطنية العقارية للبلاد التونسية، وهي مختصة في إنجاز المشاريع السكنية خاصة منها الاجتماعية، وللحفاظ على توازنها المالي تقوم هذه الشركة ببناء مساكن من النوع الرفيع بأرباح عالية كي تتمكن من تغطية النقص الحاصل من بيع المساكن الاجتماعية بثمن التكلفة، وفي أغلب الأحيان أقل حتى من ثمن التكلفة. ثالثا شركة النهوض بالمساكن الاجتماعية، وهي شركة عقارية حكومية مختصة في بناء مشاريع سكنية جماعية معدة للتسويغ، يعني للكراء، بأسعار منخفضة في متناول الفئات محدودة الدخل. ولتحقيق هذه المشاريع السكنية خاصة الاجتماعية منها تم إحداث آليات للتمويل، وأهمها بنك الإسكان، وهو بنك حكومي يوفر منظومة متنوعة من القروض الميسرة وطويلة المدى للباعثين العقاريين وللخواص، مع تشريك البنوك التجارية في هذه المنظومة. كذلك أحدث صندوق النهوض بالمساكن لفائدة الأجراء، تتأتى موارده من اقتطاع 1% شهريا من مرتبات كل الأجراء دون استثناء. ويقوم هذا الصندوق بإسناد قروض ميسرة شهريا من مرتبات كل الأجراء، قروض ميسرة لفائدة الأجراء لاقتناء مساكن أو تمويل بنائها. هذه بعض المشاريع التي أنجزت في إطار هذا الصندوق، مساكن جماعية ومساكن فردية قابلة للتوسعة أفقيا وعموديا. أما فيما يخص التجربة التونسية في تهذيب الأحياء العشوائية حول المدن، فككل مدن العالم ونتيجة لغلاء الأراضي المهيئة وعدم قدرة النازحين من الأرياف على اقتناء مساكن، تواجدت العديد من الأحياء العشوائية حول المدن. ولمجابهة هذه الأوضاع تم إحداث وكالة حكومية للتجديد والتهذيب العمراني، وهي مختصة ولها آليات وخبرة كبيرة في تهيئة هذه الأحياء. هذه بعض المشاريع اللي تم إنجازها من طرف هذه الوكالة. ننتقل إلى الآن المحور الثاني، وهو تشخيص الوضع بعد الثورة. وإن مكنت هذه الاستراتيجية من تحقيق رصيد سكني يلبى طلبات شرائح من المجتمع التونسي من الحصول على سكن لائق، لكن في العشرية الأخيرة لم تعد هذه الآليات والمشاريع ترتقي إلى طموحات شعبنا، وخاصة الفئات الفقيرة من غير الأجراء التي لا تغطيها أي منظومة تمويل، مما تسبب في تكاثر الأحياء العشوائية حول المدن. الإحصائيات سنة 2011 بيّنت أن 1200 حي شعبي لا بد من تهذيبه، وكذلك آلاف المساكن البدائية والأكواخ في القرى والأرياف الداخلية، وذلك بسبب عدم قدرة المنظومة السكنية على توفير منتوج سكني اجتماعي يضمن توزيع متوازن لتدخلاتها في كافة أنحاء البلاد، وعجزها على الضغط على كلفة المساكن التي ارتفعت بنسق سريع في السنوات الأخيرة. كما حادت العديد من الآليات الموضوعة في الغرض والتي ذكرناها سابقا عن الهدف الأساسي التي أحدثت من أجله، وهو توفير السكن الملائم للفئات محدودة الدخل. واتجهت أغلب المشاريع المنجزة في السنوات الأخيرة إلى السكن الرفيع الذي يحقق أرباحا عالية، لأن المنظومة السكنية لم تعد قادرة على الحد من احتكار الأراضي وخاصة منها التابعة للدولة، مما سبب غلاءها وكذلك ارتفاع أسعار مواد البناء واليد العاملة المختصة. لذا قررت الحكومة في بداية سنة 2012 مراجعة الاستراتيجية السكنية قصد إيجاد تصورات جديدة لمجابهة الوضع الراهن المتمثل خاصة في تزايد الطلب على السكن الميسر وقلة العرض، وصيانة الرصيد القائم والحد من ظاهرة تنامي الأحياء العشوائية. أضف إلى ذلك التوجه نحو البناء المستدام واستعمال التكنولوجيات الحديثة في البناء. ننتقل إلى المحور الثالث، هو البرنامج الخصوصي للسكن الاجتماعي، الذي يتمثل في عنصرين. العنصر الأول إزالة المساكن البدائية والأكواخ وتعويضها بمساكن جديدة أو ترميمها وتوسعتها. تنتفع بهذا البرنامج الفئات الاجتماعية التي تشغل مسكنا بدائيا أو كوخا أو مساكن متداعية للسقوط، ويتم ترتيب هذه الفئات بالاعتماد على المعايير التالية: حالة المسكن، الدخل الشهري للعائلة، الترسيم بقائمة العائلات المعوزة، عدد الأفراد المعوقين في العائلة، عدد الأبناء والأصول في الكفالة. وفي حالة وجود كوارث طبيعية فإنه تعطى الأولوية للمتضررين من الكوارث الطبيعية، وكذلك أعطيت الأولوية لأهالي شهداء وجرحى الثورة. تقوم لجان جهوية بمعاينة ميدانية لتحديد قائمات المستحقين وترتيبها بمنظومة إعلامية أعدت للغرض، ثم تعليقها للعموم وفتح باب الطعون والتثبت فيها. وقصد الضغط على الكلفة والمحافظة على الطابع المعماري لكل جهة تم تبني التمشي التالي: إعداد الدراسات المعمارية والفنية من قبل مصالح وزارة التجهيز، الاعتماد على المقاولات الصغرى المتواجدة بالجهات، حث المقاولات على تشغيل المنتفع بالبرنامج لبناء مسكنه بنفسه، استعمال مواد البناء المحلية، التقيد بالخصوصيات المعمارية للجهة. وكذلك تم إقرار امتيازات جبائية تتمثل أساسا في إعفاء المقاولين من الأداءات الجبائية لتحفيزهم على المشاركة في البرنامج. تتحمل الدولة 50% من كلفة المسكن، وتقسط للمنتفع 50% المتبقية بقرض لمدة 25 سنة بدون فائض. وقد بلغ البرنامج أشواط متقدمة في الإنجاز، حيث تم الآن إنجاز 3000 منزلا جديدا لتعويض الأكواخ، في أغلبها متفرقة وبالأرياف، وذلك للحد من النزوح وتثبيت السكان في مناطقهم والمحافظة على نمط عيشهم مع تحسين مساكنهم. هذه بعض الأمثلة من المساكن. هذه من القصدير، سقفها من القصدير، دونك تم إزالتها وإعادة بنائها. دونك هذا قبل وبعد التدخل. هذه في نابل في شمال تونس. هذه في سوسة مساكن متداعية للسقوط تعوضت بمساكن جديدة. هذه المهدية مساكن بالطوب بالقش، ليس فيها لا كهرباء ولا ماء، دونك تم هدمها وإعادة بنائها، دونك وسلمت في شهر أكتوبر 2013. دونك هذه العائلة سكنت في هذه المسكن أكثر من 30 سنة. هذه في سيدي بوزيد. هذه سيدي بوزيد انطلقت منها الثورة التونسية، بلد البعزيزي يعني. هذه جابس في الجنوب، دونك الناس بالقش، يعني مسكن بالقش والقصب، دونك تم تعويضه مساكن جديدة. هذه في جنوب التونسي تطاوين توزر. حافظنا على الطابع المعماري عند ذي حجر توزر والمسكن قبل وبعد التدخل. بسلت شوية. بالنسبة للقسط الثاني من البرنامج الذي يحتوي على 20,000 مسكن اجتماعي، تنتفع بهذا البرنامج العائلات التي لا تملك مسكنا ولا يفوق دخلها العائلي الشهري أكثر من 3 مرة الأجر الأدنى المهني المضمون، وهو $195، كما تحدد الأولوية حسب دخل المنتفع ووضعيته الاجتماعية، وتقدر منحة الدولة حسب دخل المنتفع. دونك الشريحة الضعيفة الفقيرة اللي أقل من $195 تدعمها الدولة ب40% من ثمن المسكن. بالنسبة لل60% المتبقية تقسط على 25 سنة بدون فائض. بالنسبة للشرائح الأخرى دعم الدولة يكون أقل، يعني بين $3,000 و $6,000 فقط. تم تشريك في إنجاز هذا البرنامج الشركات الحكومية التي ذكرناها سابقا، وكذلك الشركات الخاصة الآن عن طريق طلب عروض وطني لإنجاز 4,000 مثلا مسكن اجتماعي بتمويل من الصندوق السعودي للتنمية. كذلك أعطيكم بعض المشاريع التي يتم إنجازها هنا في تونس العاصمة، هذا بتمويل قطري. كذلك هذا مشروع في تبربة ولاية أخرى، مساكن فردية تمويل على ميزانية الدولة. بالنسبة للمشروع الجديد لتهذيب وتهيئة الأحياء الشعبية، عندنا مشروع لتهذيب 119 حي شعبي يقطنها حوالي 658 ألف مواطن بكلفة $266 مليون. أعطيكم بعض. دونك هو مشروع متكامل فيه البنية الأساسية والتجهيزات الجماعية والتجهيزات التجارية. هذه بعض الصور للمشاريع التي يتم إنجازها حاليا في إطار هذا البرنامج، أن قبل وبعد التدخل. هذه تجهيزات الجماعية، ملاعب رياضة. الآن فيديو قصير لتعويض مسكن اجتماعي. هذا فيديو قصير. لا دقيقة فقط. لازم هنا الفلاش هذا. تو اوفر. اس فيديو الفيديو القصير يعني هدم مسكن بدائي سكنت فيه العائلة لمدة 30 سنة، تم تعويضه في سنة 2012، دونك تسليمه في أكتوبر 2013. وفي الختام أجدد إليكم شكري وأدعو الله أن يوفقنا جميعا للوصول إلى ما نصبو إليه من تطور ورفعة لبلداننا في جميع المجالات، وأن يكتب لهذا الملتقى والمشاركين فيه السداد والتوفيق. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. هل تكمل؟ خليك دقيقة برك خليك والوضع. Thank you.
Okay, our second panelist is David Smith on the left. He's the founder of the Affordable Housing Institute. Mr. Smith brings to bear 35 years of experience with complex affordable housing transactions, programs, and policies, and global reputation for creativity, insight, adaptive innovation, passion, and problem solving. I can attest to the passion because I was having a very lively, passionate discussion before we started. Affordable Housing Institute seeks long-lasting positive impact, changing housing finance ecosystem permanently for the better, roles which David has played in the United States and in dozens of other countries, including countries in the Middle East, fusing theory and practice into solutions that prove themselves and persuade by themselves. David, floor is yours.
I'm going to get up from behind the desk and use
And Arabiya is mic.
this thing. Arabiya is mine, absolutely. And I'm even going to decouple it because I want to show you some pictures and try to put some context on Her Excellency Barawi's presentation. So I want to ask you, is this affordable housing? That's in Abu Dhabi. Now, I want you to look at it a little bit and look at it carefully, because housing tells a story. This is in downtown Abu Dhabi, and if you look closely, you can see window air conditioning units. Now, who builds an apartment block in downtown Abu Dhabi without central air conditioning? Answer, someone 25 years ago. Okay? So this building has already told us it's 25 years old. In fact, it's told us it's 25 years old because next to it is a building that's 20 stories tall. And if you look a little more closely, you notice that most of the windows are covered. What are they covered with? They're covered with corrugated cardboard. Why are they covered with corrugated cardboard? Because it's hot in there. Why do we have all of these individual window air conditioning units? Who lives in this building? Low-income, unmarried, male workers who are probably expatriates, right? Because Abu Dhabi's economy runs in part on expatriate workers, expatriate Tunisians, Egyptians, Pakistanis, Sudanese, so on and so forth. Okay, so is this affordable housing? Is this affordable housing? This is in Jeddah. This doesn't look so much different from what the Honorable Minister was showing in some of the informal parts of Tunisia. This is, in fact, an informal neighborhood in Jeddah. Funny, the Saudi Arabian government does not highlight the fact that there are slums in Jeddah, or slums in Makkah, or in Medina. Saudi Arabian government does not highlight the fact that it has approximately 4 million illegal residents in Saudi Arabia, or that there are roadblocks in Jeddah now when you commute home, because they're trying to get illegal immigrants out of Saudi Arabia. America has a lot of experience with that. We can give them lots of good advice on that particular subject. So, as the moderator said, my name is David Smith. I started the Affordable Housing Institute 12 years ago under the theory that here in the United States we had tried almost every form of housing delivery known to man, made most of the mistakes possible, and I felt it was my duty to help other people not make the same mistakes we did. So we believe 5 things relevant to this discussion. The first one is that if you cannot make nations work unless you make cities work, and you cannot make cities work unless you make housing work. Because housing is where jobs go to sleep at night. The second thing we believe is that you need entities like Madame Barawi's, like ex-architect, who are entrepreneurial, but do it for a mission. Housing does not exist, affordable housing does not exist in economic nature. So they can be private sector, they can be NGOs, they can be government bodies. They need to access scalable finance. You noticed in her presentation she talked about the combination of loans and grants. This happens at the city level. Housing is inherently a municipal function, even though it takes a national government to drive it. Now I've worked in Egypt, Dubai, Saudi. We haven't worked in Tunisia yet, but we're trying to. Worked in Turkey. I know it's not Arab, but it's relevant to the discussion. Worked in Abu Dhabi. Not unfamiliar with the region. And we've written a couple of books. Hold Up Tangible Object, which are free for the asking in soft copy. So if you want them, just email me or send me a text right now on your iPad that says free book or equivalent, and I'll figure it out. Okay, so let me tell you some trends about affordable housing and then some trends about the Gulf region, and I will do this quickly. The first thing is, we are living through a period without precedent in human history. We are going through a half a century of urbanization that the world has not seen before and will not see again. And that urbanization is overwhelming the capacity of the formal environment to cope with it. We are outstripping every element of the grid. In all of her pictures, what you saw was private investment that had outrun the grid, okay? And cities and nations are increasingly vulnerable to disasters, whether natural disasters or man-made disasters. We had a typhoon in the Philippines last week. We have a civil war in Syria. If you come back to the second panel, I'll talk about that then. As we urbanize, cities go up. They go physically into the sky, and there are two consequences of that. The first one is it changes your lifestyle. You move someone who's used to be a nomad, or used to living in the country, or used to being a farmer, you move them into a high-rise, their whole way of life has to change. And that's seldom thought about. The second is that as you go more vertical, we get into the realm of the structural engineers. So the architects give way to the engineers because gravity is unforgiving, okay? And what happens is, as cities go vertical, you have to remake the urban grid. The streets get bigger, you have to use expropriation, you have to use parcel expansion. You often end up dealing with poor informal neighborhoods that sort of huddle in between the big tall towers. So that's a complicated function of government. Housing becomes technological, and so it ages more quickly. That's something that's a very new phenomenon. Land has value if government says it has value, and vice versa. And my big punchline is that affordable housing is essential urban infrastructure. That's a picture, by the way, of Delhi. And what I love about that picture is everything that you see in that picture is informal. We have residents over shops. We have active in the street. One of the things about slums, they're lively places. They're lively places because in the emerging world in a slum, everybody's doing something. I'm getting water, I'm going to the toilet, I'm getting my job, I'm buying something, I'm taking stuff home, I'm going to school. Slums are busy places. So, now let's talk about the rich part of the Gulf, where these fine gentlemen are from. This is Dubai. What do you see in this picture? You see smog. It's really haze, but yes, you see some of that. But I'll tell you what I see. The first thing I see is rapid urbanization. In the foreground, I've got a grid that's 3 stories tall. And in the background, I've got 10, 15, 20, 25, 100. The second thing I see is increasing density. That's Sheikh Zayed Boulevard in the background, which is, to my way of thinking, the most remarkable street in the world right now. Just utterly astonishing street. I see wealth creation. All of that, that's built environment value, but there's also economic value that's occurring in those hives in the sky. I see new jobs being created. And then when we go down from the Burj Khalifa down to the foreground, if you can see in there, what you can see is that somebody has subdivided a villa, and somebody's built little sheds in, and somebody's got stuff in the backyard. And so I see a villa that probably was owned by an Emirati 20 years ago and may still be owned by an Emirati, but is being rented to probably 8 Filipinos who drive the buses, sweep the streets, are the tea boys, deliver the mail, all that kind of stuff. And yet, if you drive around on the streets, you don't see any of that because it's behind those nice, high, opaque walls that are so common in the Arab world. Okay, so here's some trends. First trend, you have traditional cities like Tunis, and you have technological cities like Dubai, or Abu Dhabi, or Riyadh. Without electricity, Riyadh is 12 people. Without electricity, Dubai is 400 people who do pearl fishing, pearl farming, okay? So your challenges in a traditional city, this is downtown Jeddah, this is the historic part of Jeddah, the Ottoman part of Jeddah. In a historic city, you've got a built environment and a complex historic fabric. In a technological city, you've got Phoenix with a mosque, okay? And the technological cities are just now discovering the need for urban renewal. That picture I showed you of Abu Dhabi, that's quite common. Throughout the countries that I have worked, housing delivery in the Arab region, housing delivery is fundamental to the government's legitimacy. If the government if a hardworking Tunisian, Moroccan, Emirati, Saudi can't buy a house, can't live in a good house, that person feels frustrated with the society. And in many of these places, you can't get married until you have a house. And young men who can't get married become extremely grumpy. And their grumpiness manifests itself externally, and that's not a good thing. It's also the case, and I say this as an American in a city that's had immigrants every 20 years and continues to have them, that the intermingling of citizens and expatriates is inevitable, and it is desirable, and it makes cultures blossom, but nobody wants to do it. Because after all, the immigrants, they're not like us. They're those people. They talk funny. They cook funny. You can tell their neighborhoods smell funny. They live in deplorable conditions. They don't want to work. They're just going to steal your stuff anyway. You know, so that's a problem. Every country I've been to, when I stand up and talk about those people, everybody nods. Everybody knows about those people. We're also hitting the place where Arab cities suddenly have to develop public transport, because you cannot move a lot of people through a densely built environment without public transport. And this is very hard to retrofit into a grid that you designed for automobiles. Citizens' housing markets are impacted by expatriates, and everybody wants a villa, even though a lot of people should have rental housing. So, next thing. It's true, everybody wants a villa. And if you're in an entitlement society, and it's free, I want a big villa. I want a 400 square meter villa. Okay. So now, this is Bahrain. What do you see here? I gave you a hint in the title of the slide. This was built for one use, and it's busily being built for another use. You think he's got a building permit for that? You think he's got a structural engineer? You think he hired architects to help him design this particular structure? I don't think. Not these guys. Not these guys, okay? So we've got self-building going on because that's one of the things that people do. We also will have changing demographics because the housing that you have is the encapsulation of the expression of your family. We have a changing neighborhood. You can't stop these things. Neighborhoods either get better or worse. And so here are some principles for government, just very quickly. One, recognize that affordable housing is as important to the success of your society as the airport, the public transportation system, the road system, and everything else. Because the people who make the city work need to live in the city they work in. If the nurses who work in Abu Dhabi live in Dubai and take a bus that takes 90 minutes each way every day, and you have a heart attack, that isn't their problem, that's your problem. Secondly, you cannot have a successful economy. To go back to Mr. Hisham's point as the moderator, you cannot have a successful economy, and I submit you cannot have a successful society unless housing works. Because there is a sense, if this city is so rich, Why do I live in such a terrible place? Housing is where families form, housing is where households form, and housing is also the way station for rural to urban immigration. Affordable housing does not arise by itself. That's part of why our moderator Hisham didn't know what it was, because it doesn't arise in Northern Virginia left to its own devices. The government has to stick it in, because rich people displace poor people, because they give the poor people money to go away, and the poor people take it and go somewhere else. That's called markets. It's okay, but it doesn't make for good cities. It does require ongoing government involvement. You heard Madam Barawi talk about all the wonderful things she's doing. That is a fantastic system. Like any system, it's got parts that work better and parts that work worse, but all things considered, it's a very cool system. And it takes the government being the driver. She talked about ARU, she talked about urban redevelopment, all of that stuff. That's a big deal. The United States has been in housing directly since 1937. We've got almost 8 decades of experience with it. It's extremely complex delivery for government. I call it the miner's canary. I have never seen a dictatorship build good housing. Dictatorships end in civil war, aggressive war, or hyperinflation, okay? So watch your Argentinas and your Venezuelas, okay? Because the capital markets will tell you whether somebody's turning into a dictatorship. Bad governments never produce quality affordable housing. So on the other hand, there are lots of good governments that don't produce quality affordable housing, but bad ones never succeed. And lastly, the key for the private sector, the key for government is to figure out how to maximize constructive leverage of the private sector. The thing about PPPs is the big deal. So in conclusion, and I've talked too long, I apologize, gentlemen, housing is the future because for him to make a family, he needs a house. And for them to expand their family, they need a house. That's the Mortgage Finance Fund in Cairo. That's a fellow I happen to run into in Jeddah. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. This panel is becoming more interesting than I thought. I'm learning a few things. Okay, to my right, we're going to have the 2 for the price of 1. These 2 gentlemen, we're going to give them only 10 minutes. I don't know why this is unfair, but that's their option. They represent ex-architects. This is a firm that was established, founded in 2003 in Dubai, United Arab Emirates, by Ahmed Al-Ali and Farid Ismaili. Ex-architects operates a critical design approach which recognizes the inherent complexity in building and construction and harness this complexity to produce projects that are robust and adaptable. It is a practice where design and tactical decisions, I'd like to learn more about that, operate in relationship to the numerous constraints and unforeseen development of any project, whether large or small scale. The ability to not only accept change and alteration, but to use these critical events in a productive and reinvigorating manner is central to the progressive architectural practice of ex-architects. I give you Ahmed Al-Ali and Farid Ismaili.
Hello. Can you hear me very well? Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I come from Dubai, so it's a rich city. It's a city that it's known for extravagant architecture. Definitely, this is what most of the people see in the media or see on television and so forth. It's a city that is of interesting building, contemporary buildings, tall buildings, the biggest, the largest, the whatever. And that scares me actually, because if you see the title of this image says the future Dubai, and it's few of these weird shapes in the sea actually built now. The Palm, which is number 6, is built and finished. And the number 9, the World, is under construction. And this kind of architecture that made Dubai actually known for its bold movements and bold kind of coming of this. But the future is actually not as interesting when we see what the research teams telling us. This is a map of Abu Dhabi in 2100. So most of it, if you see the blue part, it will be underwater. So many of the projects that you see that has been advertised as the future, it will be underwater actually very soon. And this is only a raise of a couple of meters of the seawater, so you can imagine. This is fundamental problem, the way that we see, how we see as a human nature. We see how we see ourselves. We see ourselves as the latest products of nature. We are the, shall we say, the smartest among all these guys. We are definitely the last, not the stupid ones in the back. And we think that we could exploit nature, and we could keep exploiting it. And we think it's okay, there's a problem, we can have also control over nature. Definitely our architecture has represented that. This is the famous celebrated building, Le Corbusier, Villa Savoy. The way you see it is floating on the, shall we say, and separating itself from the nature. It's already saying a statement that I am here and everything comes close to me, it has to adapt to my ego. Definitely, there are times where the Western world and the East world came together. It's an interesting time in the 60s where when we discovered the oil, definitely we needed a lot of development to happen and a lot of professionals to develop our cities. At that time, definitely the Western world had a lot of buzz names like efficiency, mass production, order. And the mentality of the architects who planned our cities, they looked at such buildings, which is a kind of a typical fabric of an Arab city and a Gulf city. Look at it as a disorder, is a kind of not organized, not interesting, maybe more of a disease rather than an interesting thing. It needs to be really demolished, as you see how the modernization has eaten away from the upper part of the image. But there are not enough studies being done at that time to understand the complexity of these structures, the complexity that made it in such a way, the social order, the cultural perception, even the perception of privacy that is different completely from the Arab world and the Western. Even the environmental, how the courtyard has been designed over thousands of years to accommodate the hot environment, the hot climate. The streets are shaded. The courtyards allow ventilation to the house. Instead, we replaced our house. So the basic diagram, you see the traditional house where you see the white square is the void, and we built around that void. It's been flipped, and we have the mass actually in the middle, and you have definitely a privacy wall that represents a cultural issue. Of course, that needs a lot of organization, so our cities changed from this to that. Other people dreamed, this is the American dream, family with a car, became also the Arab dream. We want also to drive cars now. So, as you see, Jim Jacob said that automobile is the destroyer, the main destroyer of American communities. And this is, by the way, not a typical suburb in the United States, but this is Aramco in Saudi Arabia. So this is where the first introduction to this kind of lifestyle to Arabia. Of course, we like it and we want some. And And definitely, but we need to adjust it to our culture. So we have built walls around it. So we have this houses in the middle of big plots, and then we built walls around it. And as you see, how the walls is really destroying our cities, becoming really the main feature of our cities. It's not that when we walk in the or drive in the neighborhoods of UAE neighborhoods, Emirati where they live, mostly you see that kind of atmosphere. Definitely certain values. These are not designed it's not mature and designed based on social concerns and cultural concerns, but it's been, shall we say, imposed at a certain time or built, and it has effect. As the Prophet Muhammad said, we have to take care of our 7 neighbors, but with these distances, you cannot even take care of the second neighbor. It's 220 meters. Density, it's a big issue. We have big plots, so the whole, shall we say, city became further, the whole urban fabric became less populated. Our cities has grown in amazing scale. You see Doha, Riyadh, Dubai. I see the original in the 30s and how after the boom has increased that much. This is what you see mostly. It's not the palm and nice buildings and Burj Khalifa. This is most of our city looks like that, and it's not interesting, in my opinion. That's a typical ground floor of what we consider as a social housing. So this is a really small villa for us. And we found really a difficulty also to convince the government to reduce the sizes of the villa and the plot. And our argument
notice the maid's quarters and the driver's quarters.
Yeah, definitely. With the parking full shape. Definitely finding very difficult time to convince people to change this kind of lifestyle. But whenever we wanted to develop and make right design, everybody has, or the government at least says there is no budget, we have limited budget. That's not true. What we did is that we did a simple diagram where we said the 35 by 30 meter, which we did a whole study to reduce this plot as much as possible. And we said if your initial initiation for Abu Dhabi only 50,000 villa, simple math, multiply that one by the 130 meter, you'll get 6,500 kilometers of only private walls, yeah? Only privacy wall, useless, completely useless wall. And you can stretch it actually from Abu Dhabi to Johannesburg, also completely useless. So you can do a lot of things with that wall. You can keep on and build even bigger than Burj Khalifa. The solution is simple, is to really reinvent the diagrams or reinvent, shall we say, a simple relation of how we, a complex understanding of how we live, and then reinvent the diagram. Here we show one of the exercises we have done as a sample. So here where we say, all right, what about we again flip the living mass to the outer walls, and then try to create a kind of a clusters, and the clusters start to interact with each other. So you have more lively. This is a module we created. As a result of this module, definitely it's isolated. When you look at it as isolated, but whenever you put it together, it becomes a beautiful kind of in-between spaces, which create a nice lifestyle. Also, inside the houses could be very interesting because it can bring quality of light. The courtyards can bring light, and you can use it as a plantation area. So again, thinking on a bigger scale is interesting. So we have to adapt. We have to learn from nature, not to think we are superior to nature, in my opinion. And we can look at really things like how this fox has adapted to his environment. You see the desert fox has a longer ear, camouflaging completely with the surroundings. the longer ear for ventilation because of the heat, and can also search for food and so forth. This is one of the way that we say, all right, we can take a lot of forces that has existed by nature, by culture, by even technology, and we can think in a bigger scale rather than a smaller scale. How we can design cities from day one that take this consideration. Right orientation, very simple strategies. Right orientation, right mix and densities of the built environment, mix of programs, and so forth. And carefully we started to do mock-ups and studies to allow, for example, airflows to create a better shadings within the streets. These are some of the views. And how also the whole city fits within the landscape of the desert so it doesn't damage the flora and fauna that existed already before we started to build. Definitely when you build, you damage, but you need to minimize that damage, and definitely you need to, shall we say, make as much as possible less destruction, and maybe you could even create your own system that, again, the buildings could really feed the landscapes, and the landscape back feeds the building by either water or electricity and so on. You can, the beauty is also, what is beauty? I mean, we changed most of our cities to green carpets by lawns and so forth, and we say, look, you can make a beautiful desert plantation, and a right mix of that could be beautiful. An active urban edge is very important to socialize. This is the last, some of the last slides. This is my experience in Bahrain. When we went to Bahrain, we encountered this house was painted by weird, like an interesting artwork. And when we asked why is that, they said this is an old housing that's been almost 30 years there. And when the king visited one building there, they started to beautify it. Only for that moment where people are passing. And when we asked this guy, of course, we've been asked to look at this housing and maybe propose housing condition. And this is before the, what happened, what they call it, revolution or uprising. And when we met this guy, we were even surprised that he was really angry and expressing frustrations about why the houses are not happening, and this is too much, and he couldn't understand also that the government, when you drive around the city, you see beautiful cities, pictures or posters of cities like that on the water. That's not Dubai, that's Bahrain. I call it a Dubaian-inspired urban planning. And when that's an actual map produced by SOM about the future of Bahrain. So if you see the main island, the big volume there, it's the existing Bahrain. And everything you see, rather than that, is proposed to reclaim the sea and build it. So it's a reclaimed land, it's supposed to be a reclaimed land. And the reality on the ground was completely different. So our simple suggestion was to look at the bigger picture, to link Bahrain to its neighbors. You have rich neighbors like Dammam, Doha, and Riyadh. At the same time, look at cities like Muharraq, for example, an existing fabric, and how you use this existing fabric to its advantage, how you start to relink it to its history, and make the infrastructure work somehow, and make, instead of the people who are living there fleeing the area, but really studying it carefully and create a system where you attract people to visit this beautiful fabric. And you use the minimum tactics, as much minimum as possible, to create a vibrant environment. And this is some of the tactics we have used in our design. Thank you very much.
this is really been fascinating, at least to me. We've covered a lot of terrain, from smart, interesting housing projects and concepts in Tunis to Tunisia, urban-rural housing. We even talked about slums, and David even made slums exciting. Why housing is important for the legitimacy of governments, why housing is seen in some parts of the world as a form of entitlement. That's why it has a kind of ideological dimension. Arab cities that are being developed without any thinking about public transportation. I think Dubai is one of those examples, at least based on my own experience. We talked about exquisite architecture in the Gulf, coexisting with the ugly walls, the ubiquitous ugly walls that could cover the whole Gulf and the world. Before I ask specific questions, anybody wants to comment on the other presentations? Anybody wants to knock somebody else's concepts? Everything is permissible, including fist fights. So, okay. Let's talk a little bit about differences between urban and rural housing in a place like Tunis, and satisfy my curiosity about this social housing, المسكن الاجتماعي. Can I say it in Arabic?
مسكن اجتماعي.
تحكينا عن التنمية المدنية في المدن والهاوزنج والإسكان في الريف. وشو هو مفهوم المسكن الاجتماعي؟ وشو إذا في مشاكل بالإسكان بتونس؟ لأنه أنت حكيتي عن الأحياء العشوائية، نحن بنقول أحزمة البؤس يعني التي تحيط بالمدن. يعني بلبنان بلشت الحرب الأهلية لأنه بهالمساكن اللي بتسميه الأحياء العشوائية الفقيرة أحزمة البؤس التي تحيط بالمدن اللي فيها الفقر والحرمان والبطالة وغيرها.
شكرا. بالنسبة
العربية تدرس
احنا لازم نشوفوا فما فرق بين الريف والمدينة. احنا الحقيقة لابد من ترتيب الأولويات، يعني لا يمكن أن نحل كل المشاكل في نفس الوقت. يعني رتبنا الأولويات، يعني
الفويس إذا بتقربي أكثر شوي عليك بليز. ما بدك ترجمي؟
يعني رتبنا الأولويات، قلنا اللي بدأنا بالأكثر بؤسا، يعني بدأنا بالريف اللي هو أكثر بؤس من المدينة. حتى احنا بالنسبة لتونس يعني عندنا أحياء عشوائية حول المدن، لكن فيها مساكن يعني يجب تهذيبها، مش هدمها بالكامل، يعني تهذيبها، إيصال الطريق، النور، الماء، يمكن هذا ماشيين فيه. يعني احنا بدينا ب 119 حي، وإن شاء الله يعني هو يتكلف الحي العشوائي يتكلف أكثر من حي جديد. هيك علاش لابد لنا أن نحد من هذه العشوائيات، وذلك نغلبهم بشنو؟ بأنك تنظم سكن منظم. يعني نقولوا احنا الطلب أكثر من العرض، لازم الدول تعطي يولي عنا العرض أكثر من الطلب. بالنسبة للسكن نقولوا الإيكونومي، مش إيكونوميك، حنقولوا اجتماعي، يتغير من بلد إلى آخر. احنا تو شفت مش نفس الشيء، معناها احنا بالنسبة لتونس بالنسبة للريف عندهم نمط عيش معين، يعني ما يحبوش المساكن المغلقة، يعني يحب مساكن مفتوحة، يعني غرف ودورة مياه وكله مفتوح. يعني احنا خلينا نفس نمط العيش، عندهم دجاج، عندهم يعني حيوانات امامهم، يعني تركنا نفس نمط العيش، الاركيتكتور معناها الديزاين نفسه، وحسنا لهم. يعني هدمنا المسكن القديم اللي ما فيه حتى شيء، معناها لا ضوء لا ماء، عوضناه بمساكن جديده. بالنسبه نعطيوه نواه مسكن، وهو يمكن بعد تحسن حاله يعني يكبر زي ما هو عايز. يعني حنبداو بنواه مسكن يمكن ان تحفظ له كرامته. بالنسبة للريف بدأنا بالريف وهو أولوية. نأكد لكم معناها أغلب الناس اللي تمزح هي أنا ما تلقاش مسكن في الريف. لما نثبتوا الناس في مساكنهم في أماكنهم في الريف ونحد من النزوح تنقص العشوائيات. يعني هو طبعا المسكن هو استقرار وهو مطلب أولي، وبعد ذلك وفي نفس الوقت يلزم التشغيل. هذا يعني السبب الأساسي من الثورات العربية، تفاقم البطالة وتدني يعني المسكن والعيشة بصفة عامة. يعني بالنسبة للمدن نفس الشيء، يعني فما شغل أكثر في المدن، الشغل موجود أكثر من الريف، وذلك نشوفوا احنا ديما الشباب ينزح إلى المدن، نلقاو في الريف ديما الكبار معناها والنساء احنا نحبوا حتى الشباب يبقى في مكانه، يعني لما يلقى مدرسة يلقى مستشفى يلقى كله يعني يبقى في مكانه، تنقص العشوائيات والمدن تتطور أحسن. وحتى أمثلة التهيئة العمرانية الآن تم يعني تحديها، يعني لم نعد نستطيع أن نطبقها كما يلزم. لذلك عملنا دونك عنا الأولوية بالنسبة للفقراء، ثم المتوسط الحال. الحمد لله احنا في تونس عندنا 3 طبقات، معناها طبقة فقيرة جدا، طبقة متوسطة اللي هم يشتغلون يعني بالوظيفة العمومية وفي الشركات، طبقة الوسطى يمكن كانت ستمحى يعني في السنوات الأخيرة، لكن الحمد لله تو رجعت شوية نشوف يعني زيادة الأجور، تحسين ظروف الشغل، يعني الحمد لله هي لابد لنا أن نحافظ على الطبقة المتوسطة، هي عماد التشغيل في تونس. ثم عندنا الطبقة الغنية موجودة في كل مكان، يعني احنا نركز على الطبقة الفقيرة حتى تلحق بالطبقة المتوسطة، ويلزم الأغنياء يعاونوا الفقراء، يعني الجباية باش نكبروا الجباية شوية على الأغنياء حتى نستطيع أن نعمل مشاريع للفقراء، وهكا يكون يعني نحاولوا. هو يعني التمييز بالنسبة للعدالة الاجتماعية هي الهدف الأساسي.
خلينا نعطي علي فرصة for a good summary. It's a challenge to you.
All right, so just to summarize really briefly, she spoke about the role of prioritization, so priorities of, first of all, the countryside versus the urban, providing for the rehabilitation of neighborhoods. And she also spoke of, so the rehabilitation of informal neighborhoods is an important part of their processes. However, the process of rehabilitating a neighborhood is more expensive than to build a new neighborhood. However, to rehabilitate and maintain the kind of culture of life and the culture of the country was also very important, rather than, for example, tearing down places where there was a certain kind of scale, a certain sense of a lifestyle. However, there's also kind of a knowledge that, or acknowledgement of the need for certain organizations, and those organizations within a context of Tunisia's economy. The focus is the improvement of life, but also leaving room for improvement. And this in terms of creating infrastructures and housing that allows for people to add and to build upon. However, she also mentioned that, and it's allowing for this chance for growth that begins to provide stability and begins to provide organization, which creates greater stability through housing and through infrastructure. She spoke also of the relation of urban and rural with respect to youth. So, for example, many youth would leave the countryside and move to the urban setting. So this influx of work and increasing urbanization also contributes to destability, disorganization, and this is one of the priorities. So providing housing in this urban setting, and acknowledging that role of housing and providing stability in the urban setting and political stability, as well as organization and the continuation of kind of government into the countryside. This coupled with, and then final note, just talking about the kind of nature of social justice and the different economic and various economic classes of Tunisia. So she spoke of the poor, the middle class, which she spoke is kind of an endangered middle class, but hopefully one in its return, and then a rich class. That's briefly.
David, you are the advisor to the interim government in Egypt. What would you do about housing in Cairo? I mean, what we've seen in the last few decades in some parts of the Arab world is mammoth, unbridled, crazy urbanization.
Mm-hmm.
And we've seen in places like around Cairo, people have to live in cemeteries.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Egypt is a poor country, and it's living off.
Egypt is less poor than
Bangladesh. Okay.
Well, no, but and Egypt is currently suffering a massive cash shortage because the economy has collapsed because recent events have largely destroyed tourism, which was a big part of foreign exchange. There are two or three phenomena in Metro Cairo, and actually I have advised the government of Egypt back in 2005.
No wonder they're not doing well.
When well, they didn't take my advice.
Okay, all right, okay, as long as you clarify that. But seriously, talk about housing.
Yeah. Well, the context
We
is...
have 10 minutes now?
Okay, the context is twofold. First of all, you have a huge new town northeast of Cairo in Heliopolis. And in Metro Heliopolis, and these are square kilometers after square kilometers of villas. Egyptians, rich Egyptians, believe that money that is invested in housing is safe, regardless of fluctuations of the government. So they build a villa that nobody lives in. And the theory is, it'll come, it'll go, so on and so forth. So you have approximately, nobody knows the exact number, 1.5 million completed, unoccupied, middle and upper middle income housing units in metropolitan Cairo. Most of them big villas up near the AUC and in that part of Heliopolis. Then you have, in downtown and exurban Cairo and going off toward the pyramids in 6 October City, you have massively dense, informal, clustered housing. Now, you also have rent control, the legacy of Gamal Abdel Nasser, so that the rent for an Egyptian apartment is fixed in Egyptian pounds as of 1952 when Nasser enacted it. So you have buildings, I am not exaggerating, that are falling down around their tenants because the tenants are still paying £5 a month in rent, okay? So finally, last point, you have within Cairo a two-tiered system. I don't know whether the number is 2 million, 3 million, 4 million illegal units in largely a cash economy. And those people, they live in Garbage City. You may know about the Zabaleen. The Zabaleen are Coptic Christians, and they can keep pigs. And it turns out that pigs are a much better form of urban recycling than the large trucks. So a couple of years ago, when the government decided to kill all the pigs out of Sharia because they were, haram, the result was that they now have a massive garbage crisis in Cairo. The point of telling you that story is simply this. Slums have a purpose. And part of the purpose, and this has always been true, there were night soil men in London 150 years ago. There were men who would come to your house and go down in the basement and dig out your outhouse and take it away somewhere. And it was so filthy that you could not go within 400 yards of the Thames River. It was called the Great Stink. If you Google pictures, there's Michael Faraday and Neptune is rising from the Thames River. Slums serve the purpose of enabling people who do the really cruddy jobs in a city to live close enough to the city to do that really cruddy job that we don't want to do. And they do all of that. Their occupancy is entirely illegal. And it is an absentee landlord, and it is property that was once owned by a rich family or is now owned by the heirs of a rich family. And it's all sort of tolerated until there's a collapse, right? So in Manshit Nasser, they had a rock slide and thousands of people were killed, and this focused a bunch of attention on it. And so the fundamental issue, I'm going to connect it to something Hisham said before we started. Fundamental issue is this. Who is a citizen? Who has rights to the city? Do recent rural immigrants have rights to the city? Do the Sudanese who clean our sewers have rights to the city? Do the Pakistanis who make Abu Dhabi work and who build the high-rises in Abu Dhabi, do they have rights to the city? I'm asking the question rhetorically, but it's not really a rhetorical question. Because housing, the government chooses to provide housing benefit to people it believes have rights to the city. And people it believes do not have rights to that city, it chooses to provide no housing benefit to, and to let them live on their own. And here's the thing about slums. They only end in one of two ways. Either they become formalized and gradually migrate into the city. I love that picture of the house in Bahrain with the 7 satellite dishes that they were painting over. Either they gradually become formalized or they go up in flames. 1967, Watts, Los Angeles, California, the National Guard called out to put down riots on television. So the choice is yours. Formalize the slum, or the slum in your city will go up in flames.
It's a good warning.
And that's what I would say to the government of Egypt.
One doesn't think that there are shortage of housing in the Gulf. In Saudi Arabia, it's 400,000 homes short. Why is that still a problem in the Gulf? And are there legal impediments, land ownership, social restrictions? I mean, it was horrifying to see in your presentation what happened to the old Damascene concept of the compound. I mean, the house where you have the garden and the fountain in the middle. This is a Damascene, native Dimashqi, which went to Spain and then from Spain to Latin America. And now it's been destroyed in the Gulf, where you have these ugly walls with a cluster in the middle, rather than the other way around. Can you address this? And if there are any, kind of social problems with it, legal impediments, land ownership? I mean, this phenomena of Heliopolis and all of these buildings that are unoccupied in Egypt. Probably we have something similar in Dubai, or in the Gulf in general, right? Get that chance. Take a crack at it. You have to say something. You're sitting here.
Thank you very much. I think definitely looking at the general situation of the housing within the Gulf or in the Arab region, the bigger scale, it's a difficult situation, and I would say as it was discussed, the massive urbanization and the growth of the population in the past half century, I would say, and the lack of the right policy, whether the government or the right finance in place, I would say, it has created this problem. Of course, the problems are different from different parts of the Arab world, and I would focus maybe in the Gulf. Yes, in Saudi we have the lack of housing, but rather than, I would say, the smaller Gulf states like Qatar and UAE and Kuwait, there is no lack of housing, but rather the challenge is how to create, I would say, a more of an sustainable and social, I would say, and urban housing typologies. One of the reasons is that I would say is because of the major urbanization, the prices of the land has been dramatically increased in the downtowns, in the main part of the cities. And as a result, the governments, in a way, to have the access to the cheaper land, they're forced to go outside the cities. So, in a way, if you want to do the housing, you have to build in a suburb. And then, in that case, the problem is not housing. You have to build the housing, and you have to add to it infrastructure and all other things that comes with it in a way to build in a suburb. So as a result, it's not cheap to build the housing, and it becomes a very expensive product. From the other hand, you have lots of regulation, of course, which is necessity. You have to have fire exit, you have to have bigger insulation to make it more green. Social housing, it's a public, in a way it's a private, but at the same time it's a very public property because it's being funded by government, so it has to be green. So as a result, the typology, it becomes a very expensive typology. And it's not a social housing anymore because it's not cheap. And in a way, in order the government to fund it and to maintain it and to run it, it becomes a very expensive, in a way, method. And in many cases, I would say that always the government has been the main initiation of this kind of social housing because the private investors are not really interested. Typically, the private investors, they want to have their money back in 10 to 12 years, which in a way the social housing does not give this opportunity to put a private investor. And as a result, it's the government who comes and he invests and he takes the challenge to maintain it. Now, in a case where the government is rich and they have the money, so they can in a way manage this expense. But when the government in a way maybe does not have the right, I would say, finance or the right strategy, the whole system collapses.
If you have some, I think David has a quick comment, and then we will go to the gentleman in the back. Time is flying.
Saudi Arabia has a 40% home ownership rate. It's the lowest home ownership rate among the Gulf states. Part of the reason for that is, as Farid mentioned, that land cost represents at least 50% of the total development cost of a home in Saudi Arabia, because land is artificially scarce. Large amounts of land are owned by members of the royal family. Many large chunks of that land are in waqf. The posture in waqf is that they are not to be developed. There is no zakat that is assessed on land in waqf. And as a result, if you go through Riyadh, for example, you will see high rises and then empty lots. So that, and at the Jeddah Economic Forum where we were this spring, the sheikh, whose name I cannot remember, called for zakat to be assessed on undeveloped land. And I'm no Sharia scholar, I can't even pronounce 6 words of Arabic, but it seems to me that the development of affordable housing is consistent with the Sharia purpose for which waqf land is created, which is for overall benefit and pasture land. What you're doing is you're not growing sheep or goats, you're growing people. And so we actually have designed some financial structures that would enable waqf land to be used for affordable housing.
Last gentleman.
Questions are popping up all over.
I think. Okay, all right.
Okay.
I'm an urban planner working in the Middle East, and I know that urban planning is a very young profession. I teach planning and landscape architecture at the same time. So first we have to address the core question of who defines the role of a city, and who defines, there isn't any public engagement in decision making in the area. So architects, or us the planners, or the landscape architects, are not the only, they're not the decision makers. So this is the first thing. Then the second point is that the spatial representation of the cities is a direct representation of the flawed governance systems. No one wants to live in Islam. They are there, we're trying to deal with the informal settlements because we don't have any models of how to deal with them or upgrade the slums. So I think there's a core, and we are, the Arab world, we're still adopting literature which has been produced in the West, and it hasn't been giving us any solutions of dealing with the problems and the challenges of our cities. So I think we really need to address urban planning and landscape, new literature that is being produced from the Arab world.
Okay, quick answer.
I think, just to say in a nice word, creativity is very important, to find a creative way to resolve our own social, cultural, and political problems. And that is what is lacking. Always there is a perception, all right, where is an existing model? Where can I buy that? All right, where can I get it? You know, I'm a rich state, I'm supposed to buy these things, you know? But it's not about that, it's about rethinking, actually, the whole model to adjust our way of living. Definitely we are a society who we have dreams, and we have hopes, and we have fears, and so forth, and it has to be reflected in a creative way. The perception of the society is completely different. You know, now we have, for example, in the Gulf, I'm talking particularly in UAE, we are finding difficulties to take people away or to produce a new model, shall we say, that can tackle their problems in a better way.
If housing is free, I want a villa. If I have to pay for it, I might think differently.
Actually, one of the solutions we proposed, because they said, look, the government has been given 40 to 40 meter plot, and now they came up to 30 by 30, and this is really small. It's a radical move, and the people, they will be angry about that. I said, okay, what about you give them 20 by 20, but give them other what they call it, land somewhere else, maybe agricultural, maybe industrial, maybe, and somehow don't create that kind of feel that you are getting now less. But definitely the way we are living now, it's harming the city because it's becoming so big, and you need maintenance and so forth.
Lady in the back.
Actually, we have. Okay,
Lady in the back, yeah.
سؤالي لسعادة الوزيرة، حضرتك اتكلمتي عن مشاريع السكنية للطبقة الفقيرة. عايزة أعرف من حضرتك أكتر عن مصادر التمويل للمشاريع، يعني في أفكار كتيرة كويسة ممكن تتعمل، بس السؤال هو هل معانا فلوس ولا لأ؟ وفي حالة البلاد النامية المبلغ اللي بيجي من الموازنة العامة ما يكونش كافي، دايما مش هيكون كافي. فعندي سؤالين. السؤال الأول
Can we do one question please seriously because we're pressed with time, right?
Okay, so سؤالي لحضرتك ازاي نجيب موارد أخرى، موارد مالية أخرى خاصة بوزارة الإسكان سواء من رخص وغيره، والسؤال الآخر ازاي نعظم الفايدة من كل جنيه أو من كل دولار بيتصرف على الإسكان.
بالنسبة للتمويل نعطيك أنا بالنسبة لتونس يعني إزالة الأكواخ وتعويضها مساكن جديدة ذا على ميزانية الدولة. يعني الحكومة أخذت قرار أنها على 3 سنوات يعني يجب إزالة هذه المساكن، يعني على 3 ميزانيات من الدولة كل سنة هناك قسط للبرنامج هذا. بالنسبة للسكن الاجتماعي احنا نبحث عن التمويل، وهيك علاش نعطيتك مشاريع قاعدة تنجز حسب التمويلات اللي خذيناها، يعني من تمويل قطري تمويل سعودي. لكن نقول لك احنا المشروع اللي ماشيين فيه ذكرت لك انا مؤسسات عمومية. هو الحل أن المؤسسات العمومية احنا مثلا حتى المؤسسات الخاصة تعمل يعني توازن، يعني تبني هوستاندينج يعني وتعمل يعمل توازن، تبني هوستاندينج بسعر معناها غالي، ثم تبني في المقابل مساكن اجتماعية بسعر التكلفة أو في بعض الأحيان أقل، وتعمل توازن بين الاثنين. يعني في نفس الأرض اللي يعني المشروع تلقى متكامل، يعني تلقى الهوستاندينج، تلقى المويان، تلقى يعني الاجتماعي، وهكا يعني الباعث العقاري يلقى الحساب نتاعو يربحه. هذا هو ماشيين فيه بإذن الله في المستقبل. لكن توا يعني في ضروري بالنسبة للوضع اللي احنا فيه توا لا بد من مشاريع معناها سريعة وفورية، ولا بد من إيجاد تمويلات. ما نقعد نستناو التمويلات لن ننجز شيئا، احنا ننجزوا حسب التمويلات اللي تأتينا. يعني اون باراليل نخدموا الفقير، راهو لابد الفقراء هما أولوية. واحنا نقولوا مشاريع السكن ليست مشاريع يعني استهلاكية، بالعكس هي تدور الدورة الاقتصادية حتى في الجهة. يعني احنا الحداد يشتغل والنجار يشتغل واللي يبيع مواد البناء يشتغل، يعني الحركة الاقتصادية كلها تدور. احنا نقولوا لما السكن يمشي كله يمشي، ليست قروض استهلاكية، بالعكس هذا لازم نفهموها، ليست قروض ماشية للأكل، لا بالعكس تشغل اليد العاملة وتدور الدولة الاقتصادية. هناك الكثير من مواطن الشغل الغير مباشرة. لما تبنى مسكن فما حوالي احنا حسبناها يمكن نوصلوا حتى احنا المسكن فيه 4-5، المسكن الصغير نقوله 4-5 يعني عمال، ولكن وراه يمكن نوصلوا حتى 25-26 يشتغل انديركت معناها بصفة غير مباشرة. دونك هذا احنا نخدموا استراتيجية سريعة، يعني على المدى القصير لابد الحكومات أن تتدخل وتبدأ يعني بالتمويلات، ثم نشتغل على المدى المتوسط والبعيد بإذن الله. شكرا.
So just really briefly, you only stated the question in Arabic, right? No, it's fine. So the question, just really briefly, was on how housing is financed, how the finances for social housing are made available, and then also how to make the most of that money. So the response stated the country and the state pays for the over the course of 3 years for the demolishment and rebuilding of homes But social housing specifically has to search for funding, so funding from Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and also there are efforts in kind of coordination with real estate, making sure real estate brokers and real estate ventures begin to combine lower income and mixed income types as opposed to only higher income in an effort to better improve situations of affordability in kind of collaboration with availability. But she said that the main things are speed in kind of providing housing, especially social housing, and as the funding is made available, then the responses are made available. And she also talked about the housing as an economic responsibility. So this is not just seen from the government's part as money spent towards kind of making housing available, but rather investments in the building industry, making money available to build houses for contractors, for construction companies. So this is part of an overall kind of stimulus to the economy, which has to be done quickly and with as much expedience as possible. On that note, I think we'll have to...
We have to end it?
Yeah, so...
I'm sorry, as they say, all the good things must come to an end, including this whole panel. I learned a lot. I really appreciate it. And once again, I'd like to thank Mr. Burawi, David Smith, and Habib Ahmed, and Ali Karimi too. Thank you, and sorry we didn't accommodate all the other questions, but it was a wonderful panel. So help me thank you.
Thank you everyone for attending. There will be coffee in Austin Hall. The next panels are at 12, which are education and employment in Langdale North, nearby, anti-corruption practices in Austin East, and Syria's refugees here in Langdale South. So if you enjoyed David, he'll be back for some more. And if you have any questions, please come up.
Ali.
We can go ahead and do that.
فتح هذا أول شيء؟
لا
سيريا كرايسيس 2 هيدا آخر وحدة. بس أتأكد عشان بصير معنا مشكلة. كان لا لا هي شوف هذا اوكي ممكن نوجه راح اسحب هذا ممكن له اجاك من عندك
Hi, Barbara?
Let's read this guy.
بس معلش it turns out to be